Hello, I'm Robin. Welcome to Bookspin. I've finally finished reading and reviewing all of Cordwainer Smith's stories on this channel. And today, I'm going to look back on all of those stories and tier rank them from my favourite to my least favourite. Now, for your information, you can find all but one of these stories in this book here, The Rediscovery of Man, the complete short science fiction of Cordwainer Smith, published by Nesfa Press. So this contains 33 stories. The only thing it doesn't contain is the one novel which he wrote within the Instrumentality of Mankind universe, and that is Norstrilia, which you can get separately. So I'm going to look at all of those stories now. Now, I do have a playlist featuring all of my Cordwainer Smith videos on this channel. So if there are any particular stories which you'd like to learn more about, have a look at that playlist. I'll post it in the video description. So I've got everything ready. I've got my Cordwainer Smith t-shirt here ready. So let's take a look at the list. Okay, so here are the stories. You can see that I've created 5 bands here from 3 stars to 5 stars in which to rate these stories. Now, I haven't gone below 3 stars because honestly, I enjoyed every one of these stories. It's just a question of how much I enjoyed each one. Now, these stories are all jumbled up. I did have them in the order that they were presented in The Rediscovery of Man, but when I imported them into TierMaker, it got all jumbled up, but never mind. Let's get started. The first story is, in fact, the first story chronologically in the Instrumentality of Mankind sequence, and the first story to appear in The Rediscovery of Man, and it's called No, No, Not Rogov. And this is a great story to kick things off. It's a Cold War espionage drama featuring a Soviet scientist couple who are working to build a long-distance mind-reading machine to allow them to spy on the West. Great concept, great tension and character development, and quite a mysterious ending. I really enjoyed the story, and I'm going to give it 4.5 stars. Next up, On the Sand Planet, which is the third in a series of stories featuring the same character, Kasha O'Neill, in a kind of loosely connected narrative. These stories were later collected into a fix-up novel called Quest of the Three Worlds. In this particular story, we get the climax which has been building up, in which Kasha returns to his home world, Miza, to liberate it from the dictator and usurper Colonel Wedder. But things take a very odd turn, and this story isn't so much about this encounter with this guy Wedder, so much as Kasha's search for meaning in life afterwards. It's actually quite an anticlimactic story, to be honest, with a meandering plot. It's got hints of religious symbolism that gets sprinkled throughout the story, specifically Christianity. It's a bit of a strange one, this. Probably the weakest of the Kasha O'Neill stories, but still it's an entertaining and quirky read. Not one of his best. I'm going to give it 3.5 stars. From Gustable's Planet. So this is a very quirky and entertaining story about a first contact scenario with an alien species of duck-like beings who are an intelligent but uncultured race obsessed with food. That's all they really care about, is food and eating. And basically they seek to colonize Earth to enjoy our food and all of the different cuisines that we have to offer. This is one of Cordwainer Smith's more whimsical and humorous stories. It's entertaining and it's got some surprisingly dark humour. I'm going to give it 4 stars. The Fife of Bodhidharma is one of Cordwainer Smith's fable-like stories, of which there are many. This one is not set within the instrumentality of mankind feature history. This one, it tracks the seemingly magical object throughout history. A fife created in ancient India with special psionic properties. Whenever the instrument gets played, it amplifies one's personality and one's essence. It's quite an interesting concept. It's a short story, but there's a lot going on. It's quite a charming and fantastical tale. Didn't blow me away, but it's still a fun read, and I'm going to give it 4 stars. I'm going to put it just above From Gustable's Planet. Now, Golden Ship Was 000 is a playful and absurd military sci-fi story in which the instrumentality has to face off a tyrannical aggressor using a ridiculously large golden ship which acts as a massive decoy. Another very quirky story, this, with larger-than-life characters, some crazy ideas, and a very fast-paced plot. There's a lot going on in just a few pages. Kind of reads a bit like a parody on the whole big dumb object sci-fi trope. Where shall I put it? I'm going to put it here. Western Science is So Wonderful is another whimsical and amusing tale about a shape-shifting Martian this time who's been exiled to Earth and who has a fascination with Earth technology and human engineering. Much of the story takes place in 1950s China, and this story pokes fun at Cold War attitudes and the absurdities of communist bureaucracy. But the tone of the satire is pretty light-hearted. It's an entertaining and amusing read, especially if you like zany humour. I'm going to give it 4 stars. I'm going to put it at the upper end. Now, Nancy is a story on a theme of extreme isolation and the desperate measures that an astronaut undergoes to save himself from loneliness in the far depths of space. Specifically by performing a radical procedure on his brain to create an imaginary companion. A permanent hallucination that lives only inside his head. It's an interesting concept, especially in the ethical and philosophical questions that it raises. But I'd say it's more of a thought experiment than a compelling story in its own right. So I'm going to give it 3.5 stars, but on the upper end. Now, On the Storm Planet is one of only 2 novella-length stories in the Rediscovery of Man. It's the second story in the Kasha O'Neill sequence, so we're going back to that again, in which we follow Kasha on his quest to liberate his homeworld. This story sees Kasha on the storm planet Henriada, where he's sent on a mission to assassinate someone, a turtle woman, who is a servant in a mansion, and her name is Truth, and the whole reason for why he has to do this is shrouded in mystery. That's the basic setup, but things quickly take a very unpredictable turn. This person, Truth, actually turns out to be a very interesting character with remarkably powerful hypnotic abilities. It's a fascinating read, and being a novella, the author goes into more depth with his character development and the plot than is typical for most of his short stories. I really enjoyed this. I'm going to give it 4.5 stars. I'll put it here. The Burning of the Brain is another fable-like story in which disaster strikes when a ship gets stranded in space after a technical malfunction. A solution does emerge, but it requires a huge and bizarre act of self-sacrifice on the part of the captain. This is a thought-provoking tale with some interesting character development in the character of the space captain and also his wife. I think it's I'm maybe at 4 stars. Where shall I put it? I'll put it here. Now, the game of Rat and Dragon. Now, this is an absolute classic. In this story, we have telepathic cats who work alongside human space pilots to venture out into space and protect humanity from the interstellar horrors that threaten us and await us in the abyss. So it's very much a harmonious relationship between man and cat, and this is one of Cordwainer Smith's best loved and most enduring stories, and for good reason. This story really showcases his rich imagination as well as appreciation for cats, and the cats in this story are compelling characters in their own right. I would say they were more interesting than the human characters even. So this is going to be the first 5-star story on this list. Down to a Sunless Sea is a fascinating story that Cordwainer Smith never finished in his lifetime. It was completed by his wife after his death and published years later. This one is full of intrigue and strange and imaginative world building. A war hero visits an unusual planet to recuperate from trauma. There are elements of mystery fiction and horror in here. A lot of weird things happen afterwards, after this hero visits this planet. And we've also got plenty of Cordwainer Smith's signature weirdness, colourful characters, and a giant cat that the protagonist rides as a mount. All good stuff. I'm going to give it 4.5 stars. I'm going to put it here. The Crime and the Glory of Commander Suzdal. What an amazing story. This is the tale of a spaceship commander who gets himself in a very sticky situation when his ship gets attacked by a monstrous colony of all-male post-humans called the Klopts, who have a fascinating and tragic backstory. Now, the crime that Commander Suzdal commits is how he manages to save himself from this situation, and it's ingenious, it's mind-boggling, it's absolutely bonkers, and I love it. If you read the story, you know what I'm talking about. Cordwainer Smith lets his imagination run wild in this one, and this is one of my all-time favourite short stories ever. So I'm going to put it at the top of 5 stars. The Good Friends is the last story in The Rediscovery Man. It's very, very short. It's only 4 pages long. It's a hospital drama in which an astronaut wakes up in hospital after a space mission, desperate to get back into space, but he's suffering from a delusional psychosis. It's a very short story. Not a lot happens. It's essentially a single scene story. It's not bad, but it lacks the weird and wonderful charm that is the defining feature of most of Cordwainer Smith's work. I feel like this story could have been written by someone else. Ultimately, it is quite forgettable, which sounds a little harsh because it is not a bad story. It's just not up to Cordwainer Smith's usual standard. I'm going to put it at 3 stars. Scanners Live in Vain on the other hand, is one of Cordwainer Smith's best known stories and best loved. And it's one of the all-time SF short story classics of the era in the 1950s. There are some absolutely wild concepts in this story. The Scanners are basically a guild of surgically altered space pilots who have sacrificed almost all of their senses, and the reason they do this is because it's the only way they know how to endure the great pain of space, as it's called, until now. This is what unfolds in the story. Now, this is the first Cordwainer Smith story that I ever read years back, and it left a lasting impression on me. It's strange. It's kind of discombobulating as at first as you try to understand the world of the Scanner, what's going on. But it's a really rich and rewarding read, and there are some really intriguing ideas in this story. It's also quite unsettling in some ways, but it's very, very good, and it's worthy of 5 stars for sure. Where should I put it? Here or here? I'm going to put it here. Alpha Alpha Boulevard. So in this story we have a couple, Paul and Virginia, who set out on a journey to a supercomputer called the Abedingo that resides in the clouds, which basically acts as a kind of oracle to seek out the truth of their relationship, i.e., do they really love each other? That is the question they are seeking to answer from the Abedingo. It's a really bizarre premise. This is a very surreal story. There's a whole lot else going on, including a very odd love triangle. Strange, but compelling. Let's give it 4.5 stars down here. When the People Fell. This is a story about the brutal human colonization of Venus, in which human colonists parachute down to the surface of the planet and proceed to wipe out the native sentient species, which is a kind of bubble-like race. It's a tragic and poignant tale. We don't learn much about the bubble species, but I do feel sorry for them. This one, I'm going to give this one 3.5 stars because I don't really remember it that well, which, you know, if I can't remember the story that well, it hasn't really left a very enduring impression. So, but from what I remember, it's still a pretty good story. So I'm going to put it at the upper end of 3.5 stars. Drunk Boat. So this story was created out of the ashes of another older, unpublished story which Cordwainer Smith wrote called The Colonel Came Back from the Nothing at All, which was unpublished at the time. So this is a kind of weird hospital drama featuring a patient who is the victim of a radical experiment in a new FTL space travel technology, which is clearly pretty dangerous. It's an intriguing concept and intriguing premise, but the plot does get a bit tangled, a bit confusing, and I actually prefer the original story that was the springboard for this one, which we'll come up to in a minute. The original story was shorter and leaner, and the mystery, I think, was more compelling. So Drunk Boat was probably one of my... I still enjoyed it, but I'm going to put it at the lower end of 3.5 stars. A Planet Named Sheol is one really trippy and disturbing story. This is as close to pure horror as you will ever find in a Cordwainer Smith story. A man gets banished to the penal colony, the world of Sheol, for a crime of which we never learned the nature of. This is a really hellish place where people grow extra body organs in bizarre and hideous ways, body parts which are then harvested off-world for medical purposes. It's a really bizarre premise with some pretty surreal body horror as well as psychological horror. But it's also simply a really captivating story. It's excellent sci-fi horror. And I think it's worthy of 5 stars, so I'm going to put it up here. 3 to a given star. In this story, we have 3 sentient spacecraft that have been uploaded with the consciousness of former human beings, and they've been sent out on an epic mission across space to counter an alien threat. This is quite a bizarre and ambitious space opera adventure with some pretty mind-boggling, mind-bending ideas packed in. Well worth the read. I'm going to give it 4.5 stars. In fact, I'm going to put it at the top end. Where have we got to? War Number 81Q, rewritten version. So this is the rewritten version of a story that Cordwainer Smith wrote much earlier in life as a teenager, which I'll be coming on to shortly. I think this version of the story that he wrote much later in life is a better story. He made it so he tied it all in with the Instrumentality of Mankind canon. It's basically a futuristic vision of a world of remote warfare in which battles are carried out in airships controlled from thousands of miles away, and no humans get hurt during the course of battle. It's all a spectacle. I think this story has a lot more depth than the original. It also has some really great absurd humour in this one. 4.5 stars. I'm going to put it... where does it go? I'm going to put it here. Mark Elf is a surreal post-apocalyptic romance in which we have a girl who grew up in Nazi Germany and she wakes up from suspended animation after thousands of years to find herself in the ruins of a post-apocalyptic Earth. There's some rich and mythic world building in this one with some of Cordwainer Smith's signature weirdness, such as talking bears and Nazi robots. Weird, but very entertaining. 4.5 stars is going to go here. The Queen of the Afternoon is related to Mark Elf, actually. It's basically a sequel to that story. In this story, we have another girl who's basically the sister of the girl from Mark Elf, who is woken up again from long-term suspended animation in the far future, and she gets recruited to help lead a rebellion against an oppressive class of humanity called the Dwins. And several under people get involved, including dog people. There's a bear, there's a cat woman. It's a charming and fable-like story with some nice humorous touches. It's about on the same level as Mark Elf, really. I'm going to put it here. The Lady Who Sailed the Soul is another strange fable-like tale, and this is the legend of the first woman to pilot a solar sail-powered spaceship on a decades-long heroic quest across the stars. It's charming, it's fable-like, and there's some nice humorous touches as well. But I think I'm going to give this one 4 stars, actually. Down here. Himself in Anachron. In this story, this is actually a time travel story with a very intriguing premise. A space traveller gets stranded from his wife during their honeymoon, and he ends up stuck in a bizarre realm called Anachron, where time flows in reverse. So it's a really interesting concept, but the story itself is a little confusing and unfocused, with minimal plot or character development. I don't think it's one of Cordwainer Smith's best stories, but it's still worth the read. Now, to give this some context, this is one of the stories that was left unfinished at the time of Cordwainer Smith's death and later completed by his wife. So maybe, he might have, if he'd lived longer, he might have done something different with this story. As it is, it's not one of my favourites, but it's still quite interesting. So let's give it 3.5 stars. I think I enjoyed it slightly more than Drunk Boat, but not as much as On the Sand Planet. Norstrilia, the big one. This is Cordwainer Smith's one and only full-length novel set in the instrumentality of mankind. And in this novel, we follow Rod McBann, who is an Australian stroon farmer, stroon being the immortality drug, who, after manipulating financial markets, finds himself suddenly the wealthiest person in the universe. But after an attempt on his life, he flees to Earth for his safety. That's a very basic premise, but things get increasingly complex and increasingly crazy from there on out. It is a very entertaining read, full of weird and wonderful world building, colourful characters and crazy ideas, and a lot of references to other Cordwainer Smith stories. If you're reading this book as your introduction to this author, as some people will, a lot of those references will go over your head. It is an enjoyable read, but it is also a bit of a disjointed experience, essentially being a result, this being a fix-up novel of 2 novellas that were later expanded. So I'm going to give it 4 stars, but I did really enjoy it, so I'm going to put it at the top of the 4-star band. War Number 81Q original version. So we've already discussed the remade version, rewritten version. So this is a short vision of remote futuristic warfare, as I've mentioned before. Cordwainer Smith wrote this story when he was just 15 years old, so this is by far his oldest story. So that's pretty impressive. As a short piece of fiction, it's an interesting idea, especially considering not just his age, but the time in which this was written, 1928. It's a very compelling vision of future warfare. But it's a very short story. There's not a lot to sink your teeth into in terms of plot or characters. And as I said earlier, the rewritten version that he wrote much later in life is a much more compelling story. I'm going to give it 3.5 stars here. Think Blue Count 2. In this story, a young woman is sent on a centuries-long voyage on a starship with thousands of frozen passengers, and she gets woken up from cryosleep mid-journey. An emergency unfolds when another one of the crew has gone insane and threatens not just her life but the whole ship and all of the passengers on board. It's up to her to solve this crisis. There's some great tension in this story, some really bizarre technology, including a mini computer built from the laminated brain of a mouse that can simulate hallucinations. Only Cordwainer Smith could come up with an idea as crazy as that. I'm going to give it 4.5 stars, I think. Let's put it here. The Colonel Came Back from the Nothing at All. The story that was later rewritten and expanded into Drunk Boat, which I've mentioned already. As I've said before, I prefer the original. This is a compelling mystery about a man who inexplicably appears out of nowhere, lying down in Central Park, New York, with his limbs stuck in a weird contortion. He seems to have totally lost his mind and his ability to speak. And it turns out he is a space pilot who has disappeared recently during a test flight. What's going on? That's quite an interesting mystery. It's a very short story, but it's really entertaining, and I was captivated. So I'm going to put it up here. Mother Hitten's Little Kittens. In this story, we learn of the secret behind Nostrilia's defense system. Nostrilia being, of course, the home of Stroon, the immortality drug, which makes it the wealthiest planet in the universe. This is the tale of a champion thief who devises a plan, an elaborate plot to break in and raid Nostrilia. It's also a kind of spy story, this one. It's weird, it's entertaining, with a shocking and amazing final scene that is quite a mind bender. Let's give it 4.5 stars. Let's put it... Where shall I put it? I'm going to put it here. On the gem planets, we're going back to the Kasha O'Neill sequence now. This is the first story in the Kasha O'Neill sequence. So in this story, Kasha's just starting out his quest. His first port of call is the gem planet Pontoppidan, whose leader promises him the reward of a green ruby if he can solve the puzzle of the horse. This is a really weird tale full of rich, otherworldly descriptions and compelling intrigue. I'm going to give it 4 stars, and I'm going to put it here. The Dead Lady of Clowntown is the other novella-length story in The Rediscovery Man, and this particular story focuses on the oppression of the underpeople, that is the animal-derived class of people within the instrumentality of mankind, and the rebellion that is initiated by the dog girl Dejoun, who plants the seeds of the gradual emancipation of the underpeople in instrumentality society. This is a beautifully written story, delightfully weird, with some compelling characters, human characters, underpeople. There's also a robot in there. It's also a very poignant and powerful tale. I think it's one of Smith's best. And in all honesty, it's one of the best novellas that I've ever read. So it definitely belongs up here in 5 stars. I'm going to put it at number 2. Under Old Earth is a really, really odd story, which is saying something for this author. It's one of Cordwainer Smith's most surreal stories. Lord Stow Odin goes on an underground quest to search for a cure to humanity's sad condition, which is referred to in the story as the weary happiness of mankind. It's that classic dreary utopia trope which you sometimes see in science fiction. And this ultimately leads him into what's basically a weird rave cult led by a charismatic young man in this kind of underground realm. It's a really bizarre story. It's a little bit confusing at times, to be honest. More so than most Smith stories. But still, it's a thoughtful and moving story that has some quite interesting reflections on human nature and the human condition. So, where do I put it? Let's give it 4.5 stars. And we're going to put it... here. Okay, we're down to the last 2. The Ballad of Lost Camel. This is the story of the cat girl Camel and her pact with the Lord Jestacost to bring into motion a quiet political conspiracy in the name of rights for the underpeople. It's also a tale of profound, unrequited forbidden love between an underperson and a human. It's a strange and haunting story that in some ways acts as a prologue to Norstrulia, the novel, in which Kamel returns as an important character. And some of the ideas and themes in this story get further developed in Norstrulia. So I did enjoy the story. I didn't enjoy it as much as Norstrulia, but it's still a great read. Let's put it at the lower end of 4 stars. And finally, this brings me to Angerhelm, which is a great one to finish this list with, because I think this is perhaps one of Cordwainer Smith's most underrated stories. This is a Cold War supernatural mystery thriller in which we follow an American intelligence investigation into a bizarre phenomenon detected in a Soviet space capsule, which contains a recording of a subliminal message. And this message, news of this message spreads. Things get weirder and creepier as the story progresses. Essentially, this is a very compelling ghost story and a psychological mystery against a backdrop of military espionage. And the final reveal is really quite unsettling and shocking. I really enjoyed this story, and I think it thoroughly deserves 5 stars. Where shall I put it? Let's put it here. Okay. And that completes the list. So, there you have it. All in all, I thoroughly enjoyed all of the stories that I read by Cordwainer Smith. And I can highly recommend him as an author. But I think this is a fair reflection of my tastes in this author. These 6 stories at the top here are truly the cream of the crop. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again soon.